The wind in Big Bend has a way of carrying secrets. It sweeps through the canyons, rustles the desert brush, and slips past the jagged cliffs like it's searching for something, or maybe someone. That morning, the sun rose over the Chizos. Mountains like any other day, bathing the rugged landscape in gold. It should have been peaceful, almost perfect. But for Park Ranger Daniel West, it was the last sunrise anyone ever saw him witness. Daniel had been with Big Bend National Park for nearly a decade. Locals knew him as the guy who could hike any trail blindfolded, the one who could spot a rare desert owl just by the sound of its wings. He loved the land, knew every inch of it, and respected the dangers that came with it. Coyotes, venomous snakes, the relentless heat. He'd seen it all. That's why, when he didn't return from a routine patrol along the Rio Grande, everyone knew something was wrong. It wasn't unusual for rangers to stay out longer than planned. Sometimes the desert made you lose track of time. But Daniel always radioed in, always, when his shift ended with nothing but static on the other end. The park dispatchers sent a search team. By sundown, his truck was found parked near the trailhead. Keys still in the ignition, backpack in the passenger seat, and the driver's door slightly open, swaying in the wind. The search began immediately. Rangers, volunteers, even local ranchers combed through miles of dry riverbeds and thorny brush. Helicopters swept the cliffs, and dogs were brought in to track his scent. For days, they found nothing, not a boot print, not a scrap of clothing. It was as if the desert had swallowed him whole. Those who knew Daniel best struggled to believe he'd just wandered off. His friend and fellow ranger, Maria Torres, described him as careful to the point of being frustrating. If there was a rattlesnake 2 miles away, he'd tell you which direction it was moving, she once said. The idea that he could vanish without leaving a trace didn't make sense. The weeks turned into months. The official search was called off, though small groups kept looking on their own. Rumors began to spread. Some believed Daniel had stumbled into a hidden crevice or been caught in a flash flood. Others whispered about something darker, illegal border crossings gone wrong, smugglers, or things that had no name at all. Out here, in the wide-open silence of Big Bend, legends run wild. The most unsettling part was that there were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no broken equipment. Just a parked truck, like he'd stepped out for a moment and never came back. It left an ache in the community that never quite healed. Daniel wasn't just another ranger. He was a neighbor, a friend, a son. His disappearance became the kind of quiet tragedy that sits in the back of your mind until the desert decides to remind you. 2 years later, that reminder came. It was late spring when a small team of rangers was clearing debris from a remote trail. The air was heavy with heat, the kind that presses on you until even breathing feels like work. One of the rangers, scanning the ground for loose rock, spotted something half buried under a patch of brittle grass. He thought. It was an old piece of rusted metal. But as he brushed away the dirt, his stomach tightened. It was a revolver standard issue for park rangers, the kind Daniel had carried. The holster was worn and cracked, the leather stiff from the sun. But the detail that froze everyone in place wasn't that it belonged to him. It was that every single chamber was empty. The revolver was logged as evidence, but questions spread faster than the news. If Daniel had needed to fire it, what was he shooting at? And where were the shell casings? Why had no one heard the gunfire that day? For Maria, the discovery was more unsettling than hopeful. If you know Daniel, you know he wouldn't waste a bullet, she said quietly to a reporter. If he pulled that trigger, it meant he was fighting for something, or someone. But fighting against what? That's the question that still echoes in the small towns surrounding Big Bend. Some point to the increase in strange activity along the border in those years. Others remember Daniel's fascination with the deeper, lesser-known caves hidden Along the cliffs, places even seasoned hikers avoid. A few old-timers swear the desert can lure a man away, calling to him with something he can't resist until he's lost forever. The revolver's location didn't make sense either. It was miles from where his truck had been found, in terrain so harsh most people would avoid it altogether. No footprints, no other equipment, no signs of shelter. Just the gun, sitting in the dirt like someone had placed it there on purpose. The Park Service tried to stay quiet about the details, but in small towns, secrets don't last. Theories took on a life of their own. Some say the revolver was a warning not to look any further. Others think it was Daniel's way of leaving. A clue, knowing the desert would hide everything else. What's certain is that the discovery reignited the mystery. For some, it brought back grief they'd tried to bury. For others, it stirred a determination to find the truth, no matter how much time had passed. Maria, who still keeps a map of the park on her kitchen wall, marked the spot where the revolver was found. She looks at it every morning. Somewhere between that gun and his truck, she says, is the answer. But the desert doesn't give up answers easily. It keeps its stories buried under layers of dust and silence. And for those who've spent their lives in its shadow, that silence can be the most dangerous thing of all. No one knows if Daniel is out there, somewhere beyond the jagged ridges and dry riverbeds, or if the desert claimed him for good. But one thing is certain, finding his revolver wasn't the end of the mystery. It was only the beginning, and in Big Bend. Beginnings have a way of leading you into places you might not want to go. I can also carry this seamlessly into the next part of your script, so the cliffhanger hits even harder. Do you want me to prepare that continuation? The days after the revolver was found felt strange in the small ranger station at Big Bend. Conversations dropped to whispers when someone walked in, and the usual chatter over morning coffee was replaced with long silences and quick glances toward the evidence locker. It wasn't just about Daniel anymore, it was about what that revolver meant. Finding it should have brought some kind of closure, but instead, it felt like the mystery had cracked open again, wider than before. The revolver was confirmed to be Daniel's within a week. The serial number matched, and even the worn grip bore the faint imprint of his palm from years of use. But the most troubling detail still hung over everyone's mind. Every chamber had been fired. No one could recall an incident in the park's history where a ranger had discharged all 6 rounds without calling for backup. Daniel would have never emptied his weapon unless he was in real danger. That meant whatever he faced was enough to push him past caution. Maria couldn't let it go. She'd been Daniel's closest friend on the job, and their families had shared countless backyard dinners over the years. She knew his habits, how he double-checked every supply before heading out, how he carried extra water even on short hikes, how he left small markers when he ventured off the main trails. If he'd fired his revolver, she was certain he would have left some sign, some clue. But the desert had given nothing back except the gun. That summer, Maria began revisiting places Daniel had loved. She retraced his old patrol routes, studied his logbooks, even talked to hikers who had crossed paths with him in the weeks before he vanished. Most remembered him as friendly, professional, and unusually alert, as though he'd been expecting something. One hiker recalled him warning about strange noises along the river at night, describing them as metallic clinks and faint voices carried by the wind. At first, Maria thought this was just one of those odd desert stories people liked to tell. But when she checked the incident reports from that month, she noticed something. Daniel had filed 3 separate notes about unverified activity near the southern trails. They were vague, almost too vague, as if he'd been careful not to put too much in writing. The last note was dated 2 days before he disappeared. Big Bend has always been a place of contrasts, breathtaking beauty alongside harsh, unforgiving terrain. The park's 800,000 acres stretch from mountain peaks to deep canyons, from cactus-covered plains to the twisting path of the Rio Grande. Rangers learn quickly that the landscape can change without warning. One minute you're walking in, open sunlight, the next you're surrounded by towering cliffs that block the wind and make your own footsteps sound like someone else's. It's the kind of place that tests a person's instincts. Daniel had always respected that. He believed that park kept its own watch over those who entered. "You treat this place wrong," he once told Maria, "and it'll treat you wrong back." But he also had a curiosity about the more hidden parts of Big Bend, the trails that had faded from use. The caves barely visible from the main paths. The dry arroyos that turned into flash flood death traps after a single storm. These were the areas where few rangers ventured, unless necessary. One of those areas was near where the revolver had been found. Locals called it Dead Horse Hollow, though no one seemed to know why. The trail to get there was almost invisible, now marked only by scattered rocks and an occasional mesquite tree. The place was dry, cracked, and silent, except for the distant cry of hawks circling overhead. If Daniel had been there, it was for a reason. Some of the older rangers remembered stories from the 1970s when a small group of hikers vanished in that same region. Their camp was found, but no sign of them remained, not even footprints leading. Away, search teams combed the area for weeks before calling it a tragic accident, blaming the heat and disorientation. But the strange part was that their gear had been neatly packed, as if they'd left willingly. Daniel knew that story. He'd once mentioned it to Maria in passing, saying, "It's not the heat that scares me out there, it's how quiet it can get." The more Maria dug, the more pieces she found that didn't quite fit together. A retired ranger named Ellis, who had worked alongside Daniel years ago, told her that Daniel had recently been asking about historical smuggling routes that cut through the park. Ellis said some of those routes weren't even on maps anymore. They'd been swallowed by the desert. Their trails erased by decades of wind and dust. If Daniel had gone looking for one, it might explain why he was so far from his assigned patrol area. But it didn't explain the revolver. By late summer, Maria was hiking into Dead Horse Hollow herself, carrying only the essentials and Daniel's old compass, which she'd borrowed from his sister. The air there felt different, heavier somehow. It wasn't just the heath, there was an odd stillness, like the land was holding its breath. She noticed a cluster of large boulders near the ridge that looked like they could hide an entrance to a cave or an old mine shaft. From a distance, they seemed ordinary, but up close, there were faint markings on the stone scratches, almost like symbols. She snapped photos, planning to compare them to old records, but didn't linger long. The sun was dropping fast, and shadows in Big Bend move like they have a life of their own. Even for an experienced ranger, staying out after dark without backup was a risk. The desert at night is a different world, colder, quieter, and far less forgiving. That evening, she sat in her small kitchen, studying the photos. The scratches on the rock didn't match anything she recognized from park records. They weren't natural weathering either. They looked deliberate. As she zoomed in on one of the images, she realized something that sent a chill through her. The markings looked fresh. Maria didn't tell anyone right away. She knew how it would sound 2 years after Daniel's disappearance. She was out in the same remote area and suddenly found fresh markings. People would dismiss it as coincidence or her own imagination. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone else had been in Dead Horse Hollow recently. The revolver had already made the mystery of Daniel West's disappearance one of the park's most haunting, unsolved cases. Now, there were new questions. Why had he gone so far off route? Who or what had caused him to fire all 6 rounds? And if he hadn't left those rock markings, then who had? Maria kept the photos close, sometimes pulling them out late at night when the desert wind rattled her windows. She had the sense that Daniel's story wasn't just about one man vanishing. It was about something deeper, something still out there in the endless stretch of Big Bend. Waiting, and if she was right. The revolver wasn't the last thing the desert was going to give back. I can continue this directly into the third act. Build up, making it darker and more urgent so your audience stays hooked until the climax. Do you want me to prepare that next? Maria didn't sleep much after finding the markings. Every creak of the house, every distant howl from the desert seemed sharper now. As if the land itself was reminding her she was getting too close. The revolver was still locked away in the evidence room, but its image discrete and silent kept flashing in her mind. 6 empty chambers and no answers. She started digging into older park records again, going beyond official reports and into handwritten logs stored in boxes. No one had touched in years. That's when she noticed a pattern. Over the past 50 years, there had been at least 4 other cases of disappearances or unexplained incidents within a 10-mile radius of Dead Horse Hollow. They were scattered across decades, involving hikers, campers, and in one case, another ranger. The details were vague missing gear, unreturned patrols, unexplained fires, but all of them ended the same way: no trace found. When Maria brought this up to her supervisor, he brushed it off, calling it coincidence. The desert swallows things, Torres. Always has, he said, almost like it was a fact of nature. But Maria couldn't accept that. Coincio didn't explain the revolver. Coincio didn't explain the fresh markings. She wasn't the only one who felt it. In town, the locals had their own stories, some whispered in bars, others passed around campfires. An elderly shopkeeper recalled his father telling him about lights in the canyons, flickering where no campfires should be. A hunting guide swore he'd heard voices in the hollow, speaking in a language he didn't recognize. None of these accounts made it into official records, but they lingered like shadows, adding another layer to Daniel's mystery. Maria's search drew the attention of Ellis, the retired ranger she'd spoken to before. He invited her out to his small ranch just outside the park. Over coffee, he pulled out an old, weathered notebook from his time on patrol. Inside were rough sketches of trails, notes about water, sources, and a few pages of strange symbols that looked eerily similar to the markings Maria had photographed. I found these on rock walls near the southern border trails, Ellis said, tapping the page. Never figured out who made them. Could be smugglers, could be something older. But I'll tell you this, Daniel asked me about them the month before he disappeared. That connection made Maria's stomach twist. If Daniel had been following the markings, maybe he was tracking something or someone. But why hadn't he told anyone? Daniel wasn't reckless. He knew better than to chase a lead alone, especially in that part of the park. Unless he thought telling someone would put them in danger. Meanwhile, the revolver's ballistics report came back. The rounds had been fired from close range, each less than 20 feet from the target. No trace of blood or impact residue was found on the bullets, which suggested they had either missed or hit something that didn't leave behind evidence in the usual way. The lab tech who ran the tests even admitted quietly to Maria, "It's like he was shooting at shadows." At night, Maria found herself walking the quiet streets of the small town just outside the park, the kind of place where the air smells faintly of dust and mesquite. She passed shuttered shops and empty sidewalks, her mind circling back to Dead Horse Hollow. Every time she thought about going back, she felt that same heavy stillness pressing down on her. But the pull was there too, on urge to keep following Daniel's trail, even if it led nowhere good. The deeper she looked, the more she realized she wasn't just investigating a disappearance. She was stepping into something that had been going on long before Daniel vanished. She found records of an old Mexican legend about the area, something about La Senda Perdida, the lost path. The story said travelers who stumbled onto it would walk for days without finding the way out, hearing whispers urging them deeper. Some returned, unable to remember where they'd been. Others didn't return at all. It was easy to dismiss as folklorics that the legend's descriptions of the landscape matched the stretch of Big Bend where the revolver was found. And now Maria couldn't ignore the thought. What if Daniel had found the lost path? Les wasn't convinced it was superstition. He believed it was more practical hidden smuggling routes used for generations, with certain markers meant only for those who knew the way. That could explain the symbols. But he also admitted there were places even seasoned guides avoided, not because of superstition, but because things happen there you can't explain. Maria decided to keep moving in quiet, without alerting too many people in the Park Service. She didn't want anyone to shut her down. She started hiking small sections of trail near Dead Horse Hollow, noting any oddities: a broken branch that looked freshly snapped, a patch of dirt where the wind seemed not to touch, faint impressions in the ground that didn't look like boot prints. One afternoon, she found something that stopped her cold. Nestled between two boulders was a strip of faded cloth, tangled in the thorny brush. It was pale blue, worn thin, and had a faint smell of dust and sweat. She couldn't be certain, but she thought she remembered Daniel owning a shirt that color. She took it home instead of logging it, something she knew could cost her job if anyone found out. That night, she laid the cloth on her kitchen table, staring at it under the dim light. If it was Daniel's, it meant he had been there. And if he had been there, maybe the revolver wasn't the only thing the desert had held on to. But the thought that came next was the one that kept her awake. If the desert was giving pieces back now, maybe it was because something or someone wanted them to be found. The conflict was no longer just about finding out what happened to Daniel, it was about deciding how far she was willing to go to find out. Every step deeper into the mystery seemed to pull her further from safety. And if the legends were true, there was a point of no return somewhere out there in the empty miles of Big Bend Point. Daniel might have crossed without realizing it. Maria couldn't shake the feeling that she was getting closer to that same point. And the desert, silent and endless, was watching. I can carry this straight into the build toward the climax, where Maria begins to follow Daniel's final path, and the tension spikes even higher. Do you want me to move into that next section? The nights grew longer for Maria, and the weight of unanswered questions pressed on her like the heavy desert heat at midday. Each day, she felt the line between the world she knew and the mysteries of Big Bend grow thinner, as if the land itself was pulling her in deeper. The small cloth she found tucked between rocks became a constant reminder Daniel had been there. He'd walked these silent trails, faced whatever shadows lurked, and vanished. She began to notice the subtle changes around her. The usual wildlife sounds, the chirps of crickets, the calls of distant owls were sometimes drowned out by strange, faint noises. A soft scrape, like fingernails on stone. Whispers that slipped just beyond hearing, as if carried by the restless wind. It wasn't just the land that was quiet anymore. It was watching, waiting. One evening, as the sun dipped below the jagged horizon, Maria stood on the ridge overlooking Dead Horse Hollow. The fading light painted the cliffs in a deep orange glow, but the shadows stretched long and dark. Her heart pounded as she scanned the rocky outcrops and dry riverbeds. Somewhere in that vast, unforgiving terrain was the trail Daniel had followed, the one that led to his disappearance. The closer she got to the spot where the revolver was found, the more she felt the strange pull the old legends spoke of. It was as if the desert held its breath, daring her to step further. Maria remembered the stories about La Senda Perdida, the lost path, and the travelers who never returned. Was she about to follow in their footsteps? Her mind raced back to the old symbols etched in stone. Whoever had left those marks had a purpose, a message. But what, and to whom? Each unanswered question twisted tighter inside her. One afternoon, while examining a narrow canyon trail, Maria found footprints fresh, but unlike any she'd seen before. They were deeper, heavier, almost like they belonged to someone who had been running. The prints led toward a cluster of caves hidden behind a curtain of mesquite branches. She hesitated, her pulse quickening. The stories warned against venturing into those caves, but the hope that Daniel might still be there, or that she might find a clue, drove her forward. Inside the cave, the air was cool and damp, a stark contrast to the blazing sun outside. Her flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing rough walls scratched with more of those strange symbols. It was like stepping into a forgotten world. The silence was thick, broken only by the faint drip of water echoing off the stone. Maria's breath caught when she spotted something on the ground, a worn leather strap, the kind used on old equipment packs. She picked it up carefully. It was stained, but unmistakably part of Daniel's gear. The pieces were coming together, but the picture was still incomplete. Suddenly, a sound shattered the stillness, sharp, snapping noise behind her. She spun around, heart pounding, but saw only shadows dancing on the cave walls. The desert was full of tricks, but this felt different, like the land itself was trying to warn her. Back at the ranger station, the discovery of Daniel's gear sent ripples through the small community. Friends and family clung to hope, even as the silence stretched on. Maria's supervisor finally agreed to reopen the investigation, but with one condition: no more solo trips into dangerous terrain. That restriction didn't stop Maria. If anything, it made her more determined. She began studying satellite maps and old survey reports, searching for any anomalies or forgotten trails that might explain Daniel's path. She also reached out to Border Patrol agents, hoping to understand if any unusual activity in the area could shed light on what Daniel had faced. Her inquiries uncovered whispers of increased smuggling in the region during the months before Daniel disappeared. Some suggested that Daniel might have stumbled onto a smuggling operation, possibly confronting those involved. Others wondered if he'd been tracking something else entirely, something tied to the legends, the caves, or the strange symbols dot as the days passed. Maria found herself drawn to one particular location, a narrow gorge known locally as Whispering Canyon. The name came from the eerie way the wind twisted through the rocks, carrying sounds that seemed almost like voices. Hikers avoided it, claiming it gave them an uneasy feeling, as if unseen eyes were watching. One late afternoon, Maria set out toward Whispering Canyon, equipped with only the essentials and her camera. She wanted to document everything, to have proof of what she was seeing. The trail was rough, overgrown in parts, and the sun beat down mercilessly. But as she approached the canyon entrance, the air shifted cooler, heavier, charged with an energy she couldn't explain. The deeper she walked, the quieter it became. Even the birdsong faded away. The walls of the canyon closed in, and the light dimmed. Then, faintly, she heard a whisper carried on the wind, soft but unmistakable. It wasn't words she could understand, but it was real. Her heart hammered in her chest. She remembered Daniel's warning about strange noises near the river. Could this be the same? She pressed forward, the tension rising with every step. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet crumbled slightly, and she caught herself on a ledge just in time. The canyon seemed alive, shifting beneath her as if it were testing her resolve. Maria swallowed her fear and continued, knowing she was walking the edge of something much bigger than herself. Far above, the last light of day faded, leaving the canyon cloaked in twilight. Maria felt the desert closing in around her, the shadows growing deeper and darker. Every nerve screamed at her to turn back, but she couldn't, not now, because somewhere in that silence, the answers were waiting. And whether she found them or not, her life and the story of Daniel West was about to change forever. Maria's flashlight flickered as she pressed deeper into Whispering Canyon, the walls closing in tighter around her. The whispers on the wind seemed to grow louder, more urgent, but still just beyond comprehension. She stopped for a moment, catching her breath, her eyes scanning the rough rock surfaces for any sign, any clue that might explain what Daniel had been chasing. Then something caught her eye. A faint glint reflected off a smooth stone half buried in the dirt. Kneeling down, Maria uncovered a small metal box, old and rusted but intact. Her hands trembled as she pried it open, revealing a handful of folded papers and a worn photograph. The papers were weathered but showed detailed maps of the park maps that included trails and markings missing from official records. Some of the symbols matched those etched in the caves and on the rocks Maria had seen before. The photograph sent a chill down her spine. It showed Daniel, smiling, standing next to a group of unfamiliar men. Their faces were shadowed, but the setting was unmistakably somewhere deep in the park. In Daniel's hand was the very revolver that had been found years later, now holstered but clearly visible. Maria's mind raced. Who were these men? Why had Daniel been with them? And why had this box been hidden here, in a place so remote that even many rangers avoided it? The answer seemed to deepen the mystery instead of clarifying it. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed through the canyon walls, vibrating through the ground beneath her feet. Maria looked up, heart pounding. The narrow path behind her had shifted rocks, and debris had fallen, blocking her only way back. Panic surged, but she forced herself to stay calm. She wasn't just trapped physically. She was caught in the middle of something much larger than herself. As the light dimmed and shadows crept closer, Maria realized this wasn't just about a missing ranger anymore. It was about secrets hidden beneath the very ground of Big Bend. National Park secrets some people had fought to protect for years. And Maria's heart hammered as she squeezed through the narrow gap left by the fallen rocks. The metal box clutched tightly in her hand. The darkness inside Whispering Canyon felt heavier now, pressing down on her like the weight of a secret long buried. Every step echoed softly, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone, that something was watching, waiting for her to find what had been hidden for decades. Deeper into the canyon, she found a small cavern hidden behind a curtain of vines and dust. Inside, the air was cool and dry, and the walls were lined with more of the strange symbols she had seen before. But this place felt different. There was an energy here, an unspoken warning carved into the stones themselves. On the cavern floor, half covered by dirt and debris, lay a makeshift campsite, a battered sleeping bag, a cracked water bottle, and a weathered journal. Maria's fingers trembled as she opened the journal. The handwriting was Daniel's, clear, detailed, full of fear and wonder. His entries spoke of discoveries he'd made, hidden passages beneath the park, smuggling routes turned into secret hideouts, and something else. Something he called the shadow beneath the stones. He wrote about the strange noises he'd heard, the voices carried on the wind, and his growing belief that the park held more than just natural beauty. He believed there was a force, something ancient, tied to the land itself. But the final pages were different. The handwriting grew erratic, lines crossed out, words unfinished. Daniel wrote of being followed, of confrontations with men who wanted to keep the park's secrets hidden at all costs. He described the day he fired his revolver once, twice, 6 times at shadows that moved too fast to catch, shadows that were not human. His last entry ended abruptly with a chilling line: "If I don't come back, look for the marks. They'll show the way." Maria's breath caught. The symbols, the disappearances, the strange noises, it all connected to something no one had ever believed existed. Daniel hadn't just vanished. He'd stumbled upon a hidden world beneath Big Bend, one that blurred the line between reality and myth. Suddenly, The cave entrance shifted. Footsteps echoed outside, slow and deliberate. Maria's pulse quickened as voices whispered just beyond. The rocks. She hid behind a boulder, clutching the journal and the metal box. The men from the photograph, the ones with Daniel, were here. They weren't smugglers or hunters, but guardians, protectors of the park's deepest secret, willing to silence anyone who got too close. As the men entered the cavern, Maria held her breath. One of them spotted the metal box, and a tense confrontation followed. But instead of violence, a strange calm fell over the group when they saw the journal. The leader spoke softly, explaining that Daniel had been one of them once drawn into the Guardians' mission to protect Big Bend from those who would exploit its mysteries. But Daniel had grown too curious, too reckless, and had tried to expose what he found. The revolver fired not at wild animals or smugglers, but at unseen forces that defended the park's hidden world. Maria realized the truth was more complicated than she imagined. Daniel hadn't disappeared. He'd been taken in, becoming part of something larger, a secret society bound to the land. The men warned Maria to leave, to forget what she had found. But she knew she couldn't. Not now, as she turned to leave. Clutching the journal tightly, a sudden tremor shook the cave. Dust fell from the ceiling, and from the darkness emerged a figure familiar, yet changed. Daniel. His eyes held the same determination, but also a strange, otherworldly calm. He looked at Maria and whispered, "There's more to this place than any of us understand. But some truths come at a price." Maria stepped back, stunned. Daniel wasn't lost to the desert. He had become its guardian, a bridge between the seen and unseen. And as the cave began to collapse around them, she knew their story was far from over. The desert wind outside carried the whispers once more. Secrets shifting beneath the stones, waiting for the next chapter to be written. The rumble of shifting stones filled the air as Maria and Daniel hurried through the narrowing cave, the dust thick around them like a living curtain. The guardians, the men who had once shared Daniel's secret, followed closely behind. Their faces grim but steady. Outside, the fading light of dusk struggled to pierce the veil of dust and shadows that clung to the canyon dots as they emerged into the open air. Maria's lungs filled with the sharp scent of desert nightfall. The vastness of Big Bend stretched around the mendless ridges, deep canyons, and the sprawling silence that had always seemed both welcoming and haunting. Daniel looked at her, a quiet smile flickering across his face. He was no longer the man she had known. There was a calmness, almost otherworldly, that hadn't been there before. But beneath it, the determination remained. The same fierce love for the land that had drawn him into the mystery in the first place. "I never stopped fighting," Daniel said, voice low and steady. "But this park, it's more than just trees and rocks. It's alive in ways most people can't see. It protects itself." He paused, eyes scanning the horizon. "That revolver. I fired it to keep something at bay, something that's been here far longer than any of us. Those symbols, the whispers, they're warnings, not just stories." Maria listened, the pieces finally fitting together. Daniel hadn't vanished by chance. He had been caught between worlds, the tangible and the unseen. And while the Guardians protected the secrets of Big Bend, it was clear that Daniel had become part of that protection, a guardian himself. Over the next days, Maria worked alongside Daniel and the Guardians, learning more about the delicate balance they maintained, the park's mysterious caves, the hidden trails, and the strange symbols were all part of an ancient language, a map of sorts, to keep the land safe from those who might harm it. It wasn't just about human trespassers or smugglers. It was about respecting the natural and spiritual forces that shaped Big Bend. For Maria, the discovery changed everything. The disappearance of a beloved ranger was no longer a cold case. It was a story of sacrifice, connection, and the unseen threads that bind us to the earth. Daniel's journey had been painful and lonely, but it had also been one of purpose. The community slowly learned of Daniel's fate through Maria's careful retelling. There was relief in knowing he was alive, even if changed, and a renewed respect for the mysteries of the land they called home. Maria's own role evolved. She became a bridge between the official Park Service and the Guardians, advocating for a deeper understanding of Big Bend's hidden heritage. In the weeks that followed, the park saw subtle changes. Trails were marked with new care, visitor guides included whispers of the legends, and a quiet reverence settled over the place. The desert still held its secrets tightly, but the story of Daniel West became a beacon, a reminder that some mysteries are meant to be respected, not solved, and that nature's voice is louder than we realize if we only choose to listen. Maria often found herself standing on the same ridge where she had first felt the desert's pull. The wind whispered softly, carrying the echoes of a story that had spanned years. She thought of Daniel, of the revolver, and of the shadows he had faced. The park was still vast and wild, full of dangers and wonders alike. But now it felt a little less lonely as the sun set over Big Bend, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Maria knew the land would keep its secrets for many years to come. But she also knew that some truths, when shared with respect and care, could bring healing and hope. The mystery of the vanished ranger had led her to a greater understanding, not just of the desert, but of the unseen bonds that connect us all. And in that, there was peace. The desert wind stirred once more, gentle and persistent, carrying the stories of Big Bend to those willing to hear, reminding us that some mysteries are alive and waiting.